Hey, peace to the fam. Alafia, Ebi, Bawuni, Ekabo. Um, Anybody that's familiar with Garfield and follow Garfield, anybody that follows or familiar with um, Moorish World TV, this is um, dialogue. It was supposed to be a debate, but it was more of a dialogue that took place a while back. It was something I noticed. I watched this discussion or dialogue live. It was something that I noticed that was done that was disingenuous. And this is something that I held on to for a while, but I think it's time to let it be known now. So we going to check out some of the manipulation of the so-called Moors. It continues. Okay, let's get into it. Now, this was a slide that the brother Sharif Bey posted. We're gonna come back to the first part. We're gonna jump right into the second part. The second part is dealing with Gomez Ains de Zorara. He is or was a Portuguese chronicler in the 15th century for Prince Henry the Navigator. You can look up all you need to look up all these names. He was a chronicler in the 15th century for Prince Henry the Navigator, and he basically documented the beginnings of the transatlantic slave trade. So this is a very important source that is being built on, but the brother Sharif is using a secondary source of that primary, and I have both. I've had both since the dialogue or discussion took place. And that's how I knew straight off top that some fuckery was happening. So let me show y'all. Let me show y'all what happened. So we're gonna jump right into the second part of the slide. Regarding the Vatican endorsed and sanctioned capture and enslavement of Moors as a continued assault following the expulsion from Spain, but in more practical terms, this crude categorization created a context for Portuguese aggression towards the West Africans. For the category Moor, in the mind of Zorara, we assume, in the minds of Alfonso and the Portuguese sea captains as well, carried with it a specific blueprint for action. Insofar these peoples were regarded as Moors in some general sense, and they found themselves being treated as Moors in a very specific sense, as an enemy to be fought, captured, and sold into slavery. Even when Zarara finally enunciates the concept of natural slavery, he does so as a subcategory of the enslavement of Moorish prisoners of war. And the reference that he uses is The Moors of West Africa and the Beginnings of the Portuguese Slave Trade by Kenneth Baxter Wolfe from Pomona College, page 468. Now, I have several problems with this. The first problem is the citation, the reference. The reference is the first problem. He says The Moors of West Africa and the Beginning of the Portuguese Slave Trade by Kenneth Baxter Wolfe, page 468. When in reality, that is an article. That is not the source. That is an article from a journal. The journal is called the Journal of Medieval and Renaissance Studies. That was an article from that journal. So, how do I know? I'm going to show you how I know. Just a second. Um, let's start because rather than giving you a little quote of a couple of sentences, I'm going to give you the background. I'm going to start a couple of pages before 468. just to give you, a more clearer vision and a more clearer idea of what the author was trying to put forth versus what Sharif Bey manipulated, or how Sharif Bey manipulated the source into making it seem as though the author was saying something that he wasn't. So let's get into that. I got that. We starting at page 465. And we're going to start with that top quote. I'm not going to read all of this. Y'all can pause it and read it for yourself. These words are extra small, so I'm already going to have a hard time reading. But y'all can read all these pages, the 4 pages on your own. And if you're really interested, you can download the article. You can download the PDF of the article, or you can order the whole book, the whole journal. So we're going to start with the part about Zurara enunciating the concept of natural slavery. If you remember that from his quote. Even when Zurara finally enunciates the concept of natural slavery, he does so as a subcategory of the enslavement of Moorish prisoners of war. So we're going to start with when Zurara enunciated that concept of natural slavery. The first part, you see there at the top of the page, that first part, that first section that's separated from the rest of the text, that is the quote. That is the quote directly from the primary, directly from the conquest of Guinea, which is Zurara's work. That is the primary. So this is a direct quote from Zurara himself, the Portuguese chronicler. Here, we must note that these blacks were Moors like the others, though they're slaves. Let me bring that back. Here, you must note that these blacks were Moors like the others, though they're slaves. These blacks were Moors. That's what Zurara considered them. But they were also the slaves of Moors. So he's telling you right off the rip, the black Moors were slaves. So let's start that over one more again. Here you must note that these blacks were Moors like the others, though they're slaves, in accordance with the ancient customs, which I believe to have been because of the curse of which from the... Let me start that over. Tongue twisted. Here you must note that these blacks were Moors like the others, though they're slaves, in accordance with the ancient customs, which I believe to have been because of the curse which, after the flood, Noah laid upon his son Ham, cursing him in this way, that his race should be subject to all other races of the world, and from his race these blacks were descended. So the concept of natural slavery, I talked about this in my presentation. You can find it on Kofi Pasai TV, and I think you can find it on the archives and on this channel, my channel on Niger Valley Civilization as well. The presentation was the Arab races of medieval times, or something similar to that. That was natural slavery. The concept that black people were slaves, or sub-Saharan African people were slaves by nature because of this curse, supposed curse that was put on Ham. That's a whole nother topic, so I don't want to get into that. I touched into it. I touched on it a little bit on the presentation I just named. Uh, Racist Arabs in Medieval Times. You should check that out. Kofi Pasai TV. Also on this channel, Niger Valley Civilization. But so we see the black Moors were the slaves to these other Moors. These other Moors, I mean, what did these other Moors look like? We're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into what these other Moors were, what they looked like, how they were described. This is an interesting observation on Zara's part for two reasons. First, the reader is presented with entirely new grounds, biological ones, for enslavement. Biological reasons for enslavement. That's crazy. If the Moors could be enslaved as prisoners of war, the black Moors, notice the distinction, the Moors and the black Moors. The black Moors could be enslaved as the accursed descendants of Ham. Secondly, if this genealogy of black Moors set them apart from Moors proper, how is it that Zurara could claim that these blacks were Moors like the others? Notice the distinction. Did he mean this in a religious sense? No. For when recounting Henry's reasons for authorizing the ransom of Adahu, we'll get into Adahu on another day. That's a whole nother topic. He's a Moor that we gonna have to touch on. Zurara observed that it was better to save 10 souls than 3, for though they were black, yet they had souls like the others, and all the more as these blacks did not come from the lineage of the Moors, but the Gentiles, and so the better to bring into the path of salvation. Now let me go back. These blacks did not come from the lineage of the Moors, but of the Gentiles, aka the pagans. And so the better to bring them forth into the path of salvation. Zurara is, in other words, drawing a clear religious distinction between Moors and black Moors. It's a clear distinction between Moors and black Moors. Yes, that distinction was religious, but that's the only thing that's important when you're dealing with Moors, because Moors is a religious designation, and we're going to deal with that later. So, yes, the distinction that Zurara made is religious, but that's where Moors is. Moors are Muslims. So you can't, if you make a religious distinction between Moors and black Moors, because the Moors were Muslims and the black Moors, like, we gonna see, man. We gonna see. I don't want to confuse y'all. So, Zurara is, in other words, drawing a clear religious distinction between the Moors and the black Moors, the latter being considered pagan. Didn't I say that? Black Moors were considered pagan. That means they were not Muslim. These Moors, these specific quote unquote Moors, because these people really that the Portuguese were taking were not Moors. The Portuguese were used to seeing black African people or sub-Saharan African people in the context of Moors, in the context of Muslims. So they just automatically assumed that these blacks that they encountered in West Africa were the same. But they weren't. They were Gentiles, aka pagans. So they weren't Moors at all. So I'll show you that though. Let's deal with it. Black Moors, and the latter being considered pagan, therefore more likely to embrace Christianity than Muslims would be. Again, the elasticity of the category Moor is impressive. So I think that's all I'll need from that page. I can read that the rest of that last paragraph if you so choose to. The Portuguese were more careful with their two remaining captives, ultimately securing 10 blacks, both male and female, in exchange, and Tao Goncalves was also pleased to receive a little gold dust, an ox hide shield, and a number of ostrich eggs. So yada yada yada. This was only the beginning. Nuno Tristão set out again in 1443, returning with 29 captives. There is no mention of any attempt to try to ransom them. According to the Chronica, it was the success of the expedition that marked the beginning of the broader Portuguese interest in Henry's program. Those who had been initially skeptical about the African project. Okay, so yada yada yada. Let's get to the good part. Let's get to the good part. So we see that we started to begin to see why he is the brother Sharif Bey is leaving some of this information out. This is the first occasion on which Zarawa refers to the Portuguese in religious terms, that is, as which Zarawa, that is, Christians, a subtle shift that perhaps helped to prop up the shaky connections between the slaving expeditions and the Holy War. So it was kind of using Christianity as a reason to enslave black Africans. They weren't Christian, so therefore they were more likely. They weren't Christian, nor were they Muslim. They weren't Muslim, so they could enslave them and try to convert them to Christianity because they felt since they were pagan, they were more likely to embrace and accept Christianity, which, kind of seemed to work out for them. But let's get to the good part, man. Let's get to the good part. Lancarote and Gil Ains continued in this manner to fill their ships with captives, 235 of them in all. I'm in the last paragraph. Transporting them to Lagos, Lancarote brought them to a field outside the city where they were to be divided up as booty. Let me explain. This is where they're bringing captives from West Africa back to Portugal, and they are being displayed for the king or Prince Henry, the prince. Zarawa was himself present at the division. Thus, for the first time, we get a direct glimpse of these Moors. Okay, so now we get to see a glimpse of these Moors, a physical description. Let's keep going. And this is a quote. And these, placed all together in that field, were a marvelous sight. For amongst them were some who were fairly white, handsome, and well proportioned. So, within these Moors that the Portuguese brought back to Lisbon, which is in Portugal, there were whites. There were white Moors. Yes, white Moors. They call them tall and handsome. Look at that, ain't that a bitch? Tall and handsome and well proportioned. Others were less white, more like brown. Others, again, were as black as Ethiopians. and were so ugly both in face and in body as almost to appear to those who looked upon them the images of the lower hemisphere. So we see white Moors, we see they got brown or tiny Moors, and we see they got black Moors. So it's not off the rip. You should see. I showed you the distinctions between Moors and black Moors. Now I'm showing you that these are primary quotes. Now I'm showing you the from this uh, quote of Zurara. I'm showing you that there were white Moors and brown or tiny Moors there also, not just blacks. So you should be starting to understand that Moor isn't a color, Moor isn't a race, Moor isn't a tribe, Moor isn't an ethnic group. It has nothing to do with any of that. Moor is a religious designation. It's used synonymously with Muslim or Saracen. You should be seeing that now. It is telling that Zurara should give us our first real physical description of the captives in the context of a division of booty, when presumably their looks and stature were in the most important factors in determining their relative value. So their phenotype or their physical look would determine their value. We already knew this. Well, most of us that study this stuff knew this. Maybe you didn't, but now you do. But just when it appears that Zurara is perfectly content to consider these Moors, and you see they keep putting Moors in quotes because we'll deal with that later. To consider these Moors to be slaves as a function either of their status as prisoners of war or their descent from Ham, his tone changes dramatically. O Heavenly Father, I pray that my tears, that this is just Zurara trying to act like he feels some type of remorse after the fact. I'm not going to read that. You can read it if you want to. Such an empathetic portrayal, one which focuses the reader's attention on the one basic common feature that connected Zurara and the slaves, which seemed to fly in the face of his previous characterizations. But not if we consider the fact that Zurara was writing some years after these events and thus had the benefits of knowing that many would convert to Christianity. He observed, as soon as they understood our language, they turned Christian. Now, if they were Moors, if they were Moors, then why would they immediately drop uh, Islam for Christianity? That's because these people weren't really Moors. They were mistaken for Moors. They had blacks, they had tawnies, they had whites. These can all easily be categorized as Moors. These Portuguese were familiar with all different types, shapes, and colors of people coming up under this banner of Islam, and they called them Moors. So this is what they were familiar with. They assumed that these people were Moors. These blacks were Moors, but they wasn't. They weren't. They had their own identity. So, yeah, we'll keep going. Now, this is the page that our brother took the quote from. So we're getting closer and closer to this quote. We're about there. Zurara could, for the first time, see and sympathize. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. I said at the outset that Zurara Mooricized the people encountered south of Cape Bojador. I'm going to run that back. I said at the outset that Zurara Mooricized the peoples encountered south of Cape Bojadar. He made them Moors. He automatically placed the label on groups of people that weren't legit. He called them what he knew. He was a European from Portugal. He knew those people as Moors. He knew those people as Moors, enemies to the faith of Christianity. But that really wasn't who they were. So, I said at the outset that Zerara Mooricized the peoples encountered south of Cape Bojadar. If we can legitimately treat Zerara's views as representatives of a court ethos, we might say that the Portuguese sea captains, when confronted with the novelty of the peoples of Rio de Oro and Arguim, who struck them variously as bestial, barbaric, and untrustworthy, poorly clothed, non-Arabic speaking, and pagan, responded by placing them in a pre-existing category that had meaning for them. That's exactly what I explained. He looked at these people of all different colors and said, I'm familiar with you guys. We call you guys Moors. But they weren't all Moors, though. They just automatically assumed everybody from Africa was Moors because that's what they were used to dealing with in their homeland. The people from the descendants of people of Africa, whether they be Tawny, whether they be black, Berber, Arab, whatever, they were used to those people as Moors. So that was a pre-existing category. I'm hoping y'all understand. Responded by placing them in a pre-existing category that had meaning for them, Moors. This had the effects of depriving these peoples of any cultural distinctiveness, a general label. This had the effect of depriving these peoples of any cultural distinctiveness. You just put all these people into one group. Even though these people are different ethnic groups, they come from different tribes, they have different cultures. But in more practical terms, this crude categorization created the context for Portuguese aggression towards the West Africans. This is where we get into the brother Sharif's quote. For the category Moor in the mind of Zerara, and we assume in the mind of Alfonso and the Portuguese sea captains as well, carried with it a very specific blueprint for action, insofar as these people were regarded as Moors in some general sense, a general, broad label. It's telling you, even in this quote, now it should make more sense. They found themselves being treated as Moors in a very specific sense, as an enemy to be fought, captured, and sold into slavery. Even when Zerara finally enunciates the concept of natural slavery, he does so as a subcategory of the enslavement of Moorish prisoners of war. So, hopefully you see and you understand how the brother Sharif Bey manipulated this text, kind of cropped out the previous text and made the quote or the excerpt say what he wanted it to say. He didn't make it say what he wanted it to say, but he used it in a disingenuous fashion. He used it to try to put forth that African Americans, quote unquote, whatever you want to call us, are Moors. But as you see, um, these people that the Portuguese were taking were not Moors. They weren't Muslims. They had their own distinctive culture. They had their own distinctive religions. They had their own distinctive background, the tribes, ethnic groups, sub tribes, subgroups. Like is they were just blindly labeled as Moor. And the source that he used actually tells you this. But he didn't put that in there, of course, because it would defeat the purpose of the disingenuous position that he was trying to take. It's deceit. Nothing more, nothing less. It's deceit. I honestly get disgusted. I honestly get disgusted by this. It's a shame that somebody would misuse uh, a quote from an author to try to push or further some pseudo historical agenda that he may have. It's crazy. So we're gonna go back to the first part of this slide, and you can read it. I mean, whatever it says, whatever it says, don't mean shit. What I'm concerned about is this. First, he lists Professor Nazir Ahmed, PhD, The Atlantic Slave Trade. Now, you would have thought this was a book or something, because usually when something comes from a website, you post the link, you reference the link to their website, rather than the, uh, well, fuck it, let me show you. First of all, it was kind of funny to me how he made sure to let it be known that Professor Nazir Ahmed is a PhD. But I wanted to show you what he was a PhD in, and it's not a PhD in history, archaeology, or anything of the sort. Dr. Ahmed holds a PhD in theoretical and applied mechanics from Cornell University. Now, it's not nothing that I'm looking down on or turning my nose up on, or, a PhD in anything is dope, because I don't have any of those college credentials, which is not to say that I'm any less or any better, but that is a commendable thing, and I respect that. But his PhD is not. It has nothing to do with what we're discussing. It has nothing to do with history. It has nothing to do with anthropology. It has nothing to do with culture. It has nothing to do with none of that. Ethnography, nothing. His PhD is in theoretical and applied mechanics. So, from experience, I know when somebody throws this person's PhD out there, then people are just going to, oh, okay, if he's a PhD, he has to have it right. He studied all the way and got his PhD. He can never be wrong. That's that. I mean, that's just the warped and twisted mind state of some of our people. It's sad, but I just wanted to let that be known first of all, because I thought it was funny how he just made a point to say that this person has a PhD, but it's not a PhD in anything that we're dealing with, anything remotely close to the subject. But let's get into what Mr. Nazir Ahmed feels about the Moors, who they were, their cultural identity, or their identity in general. It is not commonly appreciated that the first target of slavery in West Africa were the Moors. The Portuguese and Spanish referred to all Muslims, regardless of racial differences, as Moors. Now, this slide here. This is where this is the blog. This is Professor or this is Mr. Nazir Ahmed's blog. He created it on his own. It's not anything from Cornell University or Pomona University. It's none of that. This is something that's independent that he did on his own. He created it on his own. It's called historyofislam.com. You can go to it and check it out. Because Brother Sharif did not add that into the reference. So I wanted to make sure that y'all know that this is where this comes from. It's from historyofislam.com, and it is Professor Ahmed's or Mr. Ahmed's blog. It's a blog that he created. There's nothing wrong with that. But this also from the same article, also from the same blog, also from the same dude. This is where he took his quote from. Now he failed to mention, he neglected to mention that Mr. Nazir Ahmed also sees Moors in this way. The Portuguese and the Spanish refer to all Muslims, regardless of racial differences, as Moors. So no matter what your race is, the Portuguese and the Spanish, to them, you were a Moor. If you were a Muslim, you were a Moor. He failed to mention this. Why? Why didn't you mention this? Brother Sharif, you had some explaining to do. You have disingenuously and deceitfully used these sources. You have manipulated these texts to push an agenda, a false agenda at that black people in America are Moors. And yes, I'm saying black people in America. I don't have time for that. Black is a socio-political construct. It's not a nationality. We obviously know that. But if it's what we want to call ourselves, then that's what we will call ourselves. I'm not forcing it on anybody. Like y'all try to force that black Americans or Moors or anybody black or anybody period that with melanin is Moors. I mean, it can't get no broader than that. The Hindu are Moors too. The Arabs are Moors too. The Australian Aborigines, they're Moors too. Native Americans, they're Moors. Okay. Can't get more broader than that, man. You got some explaining to do, homie. You lied to us. Right in our face. I don't think there's no excuse for that, bro. But I need answers. We need answers. You got some explaining to do. And again, as I always say, subscribe to the Mossy Warrior Clan channel. We dealing with West Africa there, or the Mossy Clan brothers are dealing with West Africa there. I'm just a supporter. I'm one of their top fans. Kofi Pasai TV. I actually present there. Kofi Pasai TV is more of a family channel in the means of it's not just Kofi that's doing presentations there. It's Kofi, it's me, Sutek, um, his brother Vyasa, his brother T'Challa, his brother Satep, and his brother Sean. Um, Also, subscribe to the Seshu, Ma'ani Meta Nature. They are a group of scribes putting in the work that know the language of ancient Egyptians or the Remech, known as Rani Kemet, or you may know it as Metal Nature simply. But these brothers are actually putting in the work, reading the language, um, correcting uh, mistranslations, being vanguards of the culture. All these channels, all three of them, are highly slept on. I gotta stop sleeping on them, man. If we was hollering and screaming at people, cussing people out, then we would have millions of views. But we don't. We don't holler and scream people out. We don't holler and scream. We don't cuss people out. We not here for no drama. We not here for no foolery. We just bringing you straight raw information, and we don't ask for anything but support, and not support in the form of currency. Support in the form of sharing the information, sharing the videos, subscribing, liking the videos, interacting with us. That's the support that we ask for. We don't ask for money. We do this for the love of it. We do this to empower our people. We do this to defend the culture and to build onto the culture. So man, y'all gotta stop sleeping. That's all I had to say though, man. Peace out.